Picture a colour, not a colour you'd choose for a room, or a coat, or anything you'd want near you really. Picture the colour of something dead, something burned down to its last argument with oxygen and lost. Now imagine that colour isn't just on the walls, it isn't just in the air. It's on your skin, in your hair, underneath your fingernails, in the creases of your knuckles, in the thin skin of your eyelids. It's inside you, somewhere deeper than you can reach with a cloth. That colour is grey, and this city is made of it. Welcome to Manchester, 1844. Now, before you get the wrong idea, before some part of your brain starts assembling a mental image from a costume drama, cobblestones and bonnets, and someone elegant sweeping through a drawing room, let me stop you right there. Because the Manchester I'm talking to you about tonight is not that. The Manchester I'm talking about is a city of 250,000 people, packed into a space designed, if it was designed at all, for maybe 30,000. It is a city where the rivers run the colour of rust and chemicals, and things you genuinely don't want to identify. Where the air at midday is darker than the air at midnight in any decent country village. Where you can stand on a hill 3 miles away on a clear morning and watch the smoke from 400 mil chimneys merge into a single bruise-coloured ceiling that sits over everything, blocking out the sun the way a lid sits on a pot. This is the engine room of the world. Seriously, the whole world. In 1844, more cotton cloth passes through Manchester than through any other place on earth. The shirts on the backs of people in New York and Bombay and Cape Town and Sydney, a remarkable percentage of them started as raw fibre in buildings you can see from where you'll be standing tomorrow. The Industrial Revolution, that enormous hinge point that bent history in a completely new direction, it's happening here, right now, all around you, tonight, and you are one of its moving parts. Now, I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know what your relationship is with industrial history. Maybe you love it. Maybe the phrase cotton mill fills you with the same kind of dread as a Monday morning. Either way, you're here, which means something worked. Get comfortable. Find whatever position your body prefers when it's trying to let go of the day. You don't need to do anything for the next little while except listen. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness, not the comfortable darkness of a room where the curtains are doing their job, not the soft darkness of somewhere that's yours. This darkness has weight. It presses down, and for a moment, really just a half second, the thinnest sliver of a moment between sleep and awake, you don't know where you are. Then it hits you. The smell. God, the smell. It comes in layers, the way bad things always do. The top note is coal smoke, not the friendly smell of a single hearth, but the industrial version, the accumulated exhalation of hundreds of thousands of fires burning simultaneously, seeping through every crack, settling into everything. Below that, the smell of damp stone. The cellar walls, which have never been fully dry in their entire existence, sweating their particular cold mineral breath. Below that, the smell of the canal, the Rochdale Canal, is less than 2 streets away, and the Rochdale Canal in 1844 is less a body of water than a slow-moving record of everything that Manchester's factories have decided to dispose of somewhere other than on land. Dyes, chemicals, human waste, animal waste, the specific reek of a city that has grown too fast and built no systems to cope with itself. And underneath all of that, underneath every other smell, like a bass note that you feel in your chest rather than smell with your nose, burning. the faint, permanent smell of things being heated to temperatures they weren't meant to endure. Cotton, oil, coal, iron, and you. Because you're part of it too. Because you went to bed in the clothes you work in, and you've been sleeping in a cellar room with 7 other people, on a straw mattress that you share with 2 of them, and you haven't had a proper wash since Sunday, and today is Thursday. Welcome to Angel Meadow, Manchester, in the year 1844. Your name is Seamus Byrne. You're 16 years old. You've been in England for 14 months. 14 months. It doesn't feel like 14 months. In some ways, it feels like your entire life before England was something you read about in a book about someone else. In other ways, the important ways, the ones that wake you in the night with your heart going too fast, it still feels like last week. You sit up in the dark. The mattress rustles. Beside you, Padraig O'Donnell. Pat. Everyone calls him Pat now. The English can't manage the Irish. Shifts, but doesn't wake. He works the night shift at Cardwell's Mill, which means he came in at 4 this morning and he's been asleep for 3 hours and he's going to sleep for another 5. And you have learned over 14 months to be grateful for small mercies. Last week in this same cellar, there was a man who snored like something industrial. He's gone now, moved on, or moved out, or simply moved somewhere people don't ask questions. Manchester is full of people who've stopped being asked questions. You stand up. Your back objects, the way it always objects. A deep ache from your shoulders down to your hips. The accumulated complaint of a body that has been standing on stone floors for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for over a year. Your hands, when you look at them in the faint grey light beginning to seep under the door, are the hands of someone twice your age. The knuckles swollen slightly, the skin cracked at the joints, where the grease from the machinery and the dry heat of the mill and the cold of the cellar outside have between them done their best to take you apart. The floor is cold through your bare feet, not a gentle cold, a specific, deliberate, mean cold. The cold of flagstones that have been underground since someone laid them here in 1790 and have never once had the luxury of warmth. You find your boots by feel. The cellar is 12 feet wide and 14 feet deep. You have measured it, the way you measure things when you're bored and there's nothing else to do. There is one small window, set high in the wall, its glass so coated in grime from outside that even on a clear day, which this is not, which most days are not, it lets in about as much light as looking through a piece of flannel. 8 people live here. You, Pat, a man named Flynn who works at the dye, works near the Irwell, and whose clothes have taken on a permanent greenish cast that no washing removes. A woman everyone calls Bridget who cooks for the whole floor and takes in sewing on the side. Her daughter Mare, who is 9 years old, and who you're trying very hard not to think about right now. And 3 men you don't know well whose names you've been told and immediately forgotten. Because in Manchester, you learn quickly that knowing names means investing something. An investment requires surplus, and you do not have surplus. The room above costs more. The room below is a storage cellar, and in winter the water comes up through the floor. You know this because Bridget told you on your first night, pointing at a waterline on the wall about 6 inches up from the ground, and you stared at it for a long time, trying to understand that people had lived below that line. Some still do, in other buildings on other streets. Manchester is that kind of city. You eat standing up most mornings. Today is no different. Bridget has left bread on the shelf by the door, a dense greyish loaf that is mostly oatmeal, and would be unpleasant if you were in a position to be unpleasant about food, which you are not. You tear off a piece and eat it in 3 bites. The bread is cold. Everything here is cold in the morning. In summer, the cellar is merely cool. In winter, it achieves a dampness that gets into your lungs and stays there, and half the building coughs from November to April. You pour water from the clay jug into the basin. The water is cold, of course it is, and slightly brownish, which might be the jug or might be the water, and you've stopped trying to determine which. You splash it on your face. It doesn't so much wake you up as remind you that being awake is a physical state with physical consequences. In the cracked piece of looking glass propped against the wall, you get a brief look at yourself. Grey. You are grey. Not just your skin, the greyness of a person who hasn't seen proper sunlight in months, but your hair, your eyebrows, the fine lines at the corners of your eyes. Soot and cotton dust have found every crease and filled it in. You look like someone has taken a version of you and faded it, the way a print fades when it's left in the sun too long. You're 16 years old. You look considerably older. Outside, through the door, up the narrow stairs, through the street-level door that sticks and requires your shoulder. Outside, Manchester is already fully awake. It is 5:45 in the morning, and the city has been awake since 4. The streets of Angel Meadow are not empty at any hour. This is one of the things you noticed immediately when you arrived. Stumbling off a wagon from the Liverpool docks with a bundle of clothes and a letter written by your uncle in Roscommon, addressed to a man who turned out to have moved on 2 years ago. The streets of Angel Meadow are never empty because the people who live in them can't afford to waste light. Light costs money. Time costs money. Everything costs something. The street you're on, Thomas Street, which sounds respectable and is emphatically not, is already moving. Women carrying pails, men in the heavy boots of mill workers, the boots that cost more than 3 days' wages but last 3 years if you're careful, moving in groups of 2 and 3 toward the sound that underlies everything in this part of Manchester. The sound of engines, not horse engines, not water mills, steam engines, a constant low vibration that you don't so much hear as feel in your teeth, in the soles of your feet. A mechanical heartbeat that the city has had since before you arrived and will have long after you're gone. You join the flow. The walk to Cardwell's takes 20 minutes. 20 minutes through streets that the sun, even when it's trying, even on a June morning when somewhere else in England there are fields and hedges and actual visible sky, the sun cannot penetrate fully. The mills block it. Their chimneys, 60, 70, 100 feet tall, rise in rows that create canyons between them, and the smoke they pour upward joins the general darkness overhead before it can be called sky. The smell changes as you walk, away from the cellar's particular cocktail of bodies and stone and canal water, into the wider smell of the streets. Horse dung, obviously. There are hundreds of horses in Manchester, and they produce at the rate you'd expect. And the smell of the slaughterhouse on Miller Street. A dark iron smell that coats the back of your throat, and the smell of the bleach works further on. A sharp chemical bite that makes your eyes water if you're not used to it. You're used to it. You pass the court off Thomas Street where the O'Brien family lives. You don't know which ones. There are roughly 40 O'Briens in a 2-street radius, and where someone is already arguing. A woman's voice, high and sharp. A man's answer, lower, defensive. The sound of a door. You keep walking. Manchester is not a city that invites you to linger. It moves, and you move with it, or it moves over you. This is the lesson it teaches newcomers in the first week, usually without words, usually through simple consequence. You pass a dead dog in the gutter. It's been there since Tuesday. These things are handled eventually. The scavengers, the knocker men who collect the worst of the street debris. But eventually in Manchester means something looser than you might prefer. You step around it. The child sitting in the doorway nearby watches you with the particular eyes of Angel Meadow children. Old eyes in young faces, already calculating, already measuring whether you're worth speaking to or better left alone. He's maybe 7, maybe 8. Hard to tell. Manchester children are often smaller than their age, for reasons that become obvious the moment you understand what they eat and how they sleep and how little of either they do. He doesn't ask you for anything. You don't offer. This is how Angel Meadow works. This is how most of Manchester works. Charity exists here. There are missions, soup kitchens, charitable societies with long names and earnest intentions. But the geography of need is so vast that charity is like rain on a drought. It lands, it helps someone. Then it's gone, and the drought continues. The mill appears before you see the sign. You hear it first. The looms, the spinning frames, the specific mechanical thunder of a cotton mill at full operation is unlike any other sound. It's not just loud, it's encompassing. It fills your skull. It replaces your own heartbeat with something faster, more insistent. After a year of it, you barely notice it anymore. This is either adaptation or damage, probably both. Then you feel it. The heat. Even in the street, 10 yards from the entrance, the air is warmer. Not pleasantly warmer. The warmth of an engine. The warmth of enclosed space running at full capacity. Cotton thread requires a certain temperature and humidity to spin without breaking. This means that inside the mill it is always hot, always damp. The damp heat of something living, breathing, but not alive. Not really. Then you smell it. Cotton. Raw cotton and machine oil and the particular smell of wool and hot iron, and the sweat of several hundred people who've been standing in this heat since 4 a.m. And then you see it. Cardwell's fine cotton mill. 5 stories, 70 feet wide, 210 feet long. You know the measurements because you've spent enough hours inside these walls to have worked out their dimensions the way you worked out the cellar. When you're trapped somewhere, you measure it. It's a human thing to do, measuring. It gives you the illusion of control. The gate is already open. You join the stream of workers flowing through it. The overlooker at the gate is a man named Simcox, Josiah Simcox, 43 years old, which looks closer to 55 up close. The face of a man who has spent 20 years being responsible for other people's productivity and has found the experience neither rewarding nor particularly character-building. He has a watch on a chain, a good watch, a watch that cost real money, because time is the primary currency of the mill, and the man who controls the clock controls everything. He looks at you as you pass. He looks at everyone as they pass. It's a specific look, the Simcox look, assessing whether you're there, whether you're sober, whether you're going to be a problem today. It is not a friendly look. It is not an unfriendly look. It is the look of a man performing a function. You pass without incident. Burn, he says anyway, as you're almost through. You stop. Turn. Clock in properly today. Yesterday you were 30 seconds late and I docked it. You were not 30 seconds late yesterday. You were 3 minutes early and Simcox's watch was running fast, which is a thing you cannot say to Simcox's face and will not say to Simcox's face, because you are 16 years old and Irish, and your position at Cardwell's is what stands between you and the kind of life that ends in an unmarked grave before your 20th birthday. Yes, Mr. Simcox, you say. He nods. You go in. This is how the day begins. The spinning room is on the 3rd floor. 3 flights of stairs, each flight narrower than feels reasonable given the number of people using it, with a smell that changes at each landing. Ground floor, raw cotton storage, the pressing vegetable smell of compressed bales, almost sweet, deceptively so. 2nd floor, carding room, the heavy mechanical noise starting to dominate, the air thickening. 3rd floor, spinning. You push through the door. The heat hits you first. Always the heat. In June, the spinning room runs at roughly 85 degrees Fahrenheit. In January, it runs at the same temperature because the cotton doesn't care about seasons. The windows are kept closed. The humidity is kept high. They spray water, actual water, from jets along the ceiling. Because dry air means broken thread, and broken thread means stopped machines, and stopped machines means lost production, and lost production means Simcox's particular brand of attention, which you do not want. The noise is immediate and total. 240 spinning frames, each one a construction of iron and steel and leather belts and dozens of moving spindles, each spindle drawing cotton into thread at a speed your eye can barely follow. The sound is not a single sound. It's a conversation between metals. The deep thump of the main shaft turning, the lighter rattle of the frames, the whir of the spindles, the occasional sharp crack of a broken thread, the hiss of the water jets. You cannot have a conversation in here. You can shout if the person is close enough and you are shouting directly into their ear. For anything more complex than a shout, you wait. You take your position. Your job is piecing. This is what a piecer does. You watch for broken threads. Cotton threads break constantly. They're thin. They're under tension. And no matter how carefully the cotton is processed before it reaches the frame, inconsistencies get through. A knot, a thin spot, a variation in the moisture content of the fibre, and when the thread breaks, the spinning frame doesn't stop. The frame never stops. The frame stops for nothing except catastrophe or a direct order from the overlooker, and even then it objects. When the thread breaks, you piece it. This means you reach into the moving machinery and join the 2 broken ends together with a twist of your fingers. The motion is precise. Pinch, twist, thin the join, release. You do this quickly enough that the frame doesn't fall too far behind, quickly enough that the end product doesn't have a fault in it that an inspector will find later. You do this several hundred times a day. The machinery does not stop while you do it. This is not when you think about it, and you try not to think about it, but sometimes your mind arrives at it anyway. This is not a survivable situation if your attention wavers at the wrong moment. The rollers that draw the cotton are steel. They are designed to grip, to pull, to reduce. They do not distinguish between cotton and the finger of a 16-year-old from Roscommon. You know this because you have seen what they do to fingers. Tommy Walsh, 17, lost the first joint of his right index finger 8 months ago. He was back at his frame 2 days later. He had no choice. He had no choice because he had no savings, and Cardwell's didn't pay while you were off injured, and that was simply how it was. He pieces now with his other hand taking most of the weight. He manages. He doesn't mention the finger. Neither do you. You don't think about Tommy's finger now. You think about the thread. Just the thread. The first hour of the morning shift is always the hardest. Your body hasn't caught up with being awake. Your hands, still cold from the walk and the cellar, are slower than they need to be. The heat of the room starts to ease the cold out of your joints, slowly, the way warmth always works. Reluctant, unhurried, unconcerned with your timeline, you watch your frame. 12 spindles, 10 threads active, 2 are already thin-looking. There, a break. You're moving before the thought is complete. 2 steps, reach, twist, join. The thread holds, you step back, watch. Another break, 3 frames down, not yours. The piecer on that frame, a girl named Eliza, maybe 13, has been here longer than you, is already there. Her small hands working with the particular economy of movement that comes from doing something several thousand times. She doesn't look at what her hands are doing. She's looking down the line at the next potential problem. This is what it does to you. It removes you from yourself. Your hands become a separate intelligence. Your body knows the job better than your mind does. Your mind, such as it is, floats somewhere above the machinery and the heat and the noise, occasionally noticing things. The particular colour of the light through the grimy windows, the way the cotton dust floats in certain slants of it, like snow falling upward, while your hands do the actual work of keeping you alive. Cotton dust. This deserves a moment of its own, this cotton dust, because it is everywhere, and it is constant, and it is the signature substance of your existence in 1844 Manchester. It comes off the raw cotton during carding, during roving, during spinning. It's not large, visible fluff. Not mostly, though there's that too. It's finer than that. It's particles, a cloud of them, hanging in the heated damp air at every level. You breathe it in every day, all day. It coats the inside of your lungs the way it coats everything else. The way it coated your skin when you woke up this morning, because you fell asleep too tired to wash, and the dust had settled into you overnight. What this does to a person's lungs over years is something that in 1844 nobody officially discusses, though the people who work in the mills have words for it. The cough, the Monday morning shortness of breath. The way some of the older workers, the ones who've been at it for 20 years, breathe with a particular wet effort, a labour that goes with them like an extra weight. You're 16. Your lungs are not yet complaining in that particular way, but they're keeping a record. By 7 o'clock the room has fully warmed to its operating temperature, and so have you. Your hands are moving without hesitation now, the cold worked out, the rhythm established. You stop consciously thinking about each break and start simply responding to them. Across the frame from you, 3 positions down, there's a boy named Owen. Owen Healy, 12 years old, a scavenger. Scavengers are the youngest workers in the mill, children young enough and small enough to crawl under the operating machinery, to collect the waste cotton that falls there, the bits of thread and fluff and fibre that accumulate on the floor beneath the frames. If it's not collected, it becomes a fire hazard. Cotton burns, and in a mill where there are dozens of oil lamps and gas jets and hot metal surfaces, fire is a constant threat. So the scavengers crawl. They crawl between the moving parts of the frames. They reach under the moving parts to pull out the cotton. They do this while the machinery is running. You did this job once when you first came to Cardwell's, for 3 weeks before Simcox moved you up to piecing. Those 3 weeks established in your body a set of reflexes, duck, tuck, don't stop moving, that you have never fully lost. Even now, 18 months later, If something moves suddenly near your head, you flinch in a specific way that has nothing to do with ordinary startled reflexes and everything to do with what it's like to have a steel roller past 6 inches above your skull on a daily basis. Owen is too small for his age and smart in the ways that matter here. Quick, observant, careful. You've watched him work. He's good. He reads the rhythm of the frame the way a musician reads a score, knowing when to go and when to wait. But he's 12 and tired, and you've noticed this morning that he's been favouring his left hand, which means something happened to his right that he doesn't want Simcox to notice. You keep an eye on him between your own work. There is a rhythm to the morning. It's not a comfortable rhythm, not the rhythm of something that wants you there. The machinery has no opinions about you, which is both better and worse than it sounds. But it's a rhythm you know, and knowing it is its own form of protection. At 8:30, a water carrier comes through with a pail and a shared tin cup. The water is warm from the air temperature and tastes of iron, and you drink 2 cups because you've been sweating since you walked in and the heat is relentless. The woman with the pail, you don't know her name, she works a different floor most days, moves efficiently down the row, spending 3 seconds at each station, pausing for no one, the pail getting lighter as she goes. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. Your hand comes away grey. There it is again. That grey. It's always there. You used to find it strange, the way Manchester stains everything it touches, the way the city's particular chemical and combustion products find their way into the composition of every surface. Now you find it normal, which is a different problem. You go back to the thread. At 10 o'clock, something happens. It's not dramatic, in the way that dramatic things happen in stories. There's no explosion, no announcement, just a sound, or rather a change in the sounds, the way a conversation changes when a new voice enters it, and a slight shift in the way the people around you are holding themselves. Simcox is at the door, and behind Simcox someone you haven't seen before. A man in a coat that cost more than you'll earn this month. Clean. Conspicuously, deliberately, professionally clean. In a place where cleanliness requires sustained effort and resources that nobody in this room possesses. He has a notebook. He's writing in it already before he's fully through the door, which means he's been writing about this place since before he entered it. Which means he has opinions about what he's going to find here before he finds it. A factory inspector. The Factory Act of 1833 said that children under 9 couldn't work in textile mills. That was 11 years ago. The Factory Act of 1844, the new one, the one that's been passed this very year, extended those protections. Children between 9 and 13, no more than 6.5 hours a day. Women and children under 18, no more than 12 hours. These are the rules. You'll notice that the rules say nothing about men over 18. Men over 18 can work as long as Cardwell's wants them to, and Cardwell's wants them to work as long as the machines are running, which is at certain points in the production cycle 16 or 18 hours. You are 16. You are technically protected. You are currently in your 9th hour of a 12-hour shift. The inspector moves through the room. He writes. He asks questions. You can't hear them over the machinery, but you can read the conversation from the body language. Simcox. Deferential but contained, the specific posture of a man who is used to navigating authority while not quite submitting to it. The inspector, precise and unhurried. He stops at Owen. You watch. Simcox says something. The inspector writes. He looks at Owen. looks at him the way you might look at a door to estimate its dimensions, not cruelly but clinically, and writes more. Owen stands still and looks at a point on the floor about 8 inches in front of his feet. You can see from here that Owen's right hand is wrapped in a strip of cloth that isn't quite concealing a dark stain. The inspector sees it too. He writes. Simcox's jaw tightens by roughly 1/4 of an inch, barely visible. But you've been watching Simcox's jaw for 14 months, and you know its vocabulary. The inspector moves on. Owen looks up very briefly and meets your eyes across the machinery. His face is the face of someone who has learned that visibility is dangerous and invisibility is survival. You look back at your thread. The inspector is gone by 11. Nobody in the room says anything directly about his visit. Nobody says anything directly about most things in Cardwell's spinning room. The noise prohibits casual conversation, and in any case there's a specific Cardwell's tradition, learned and maintained through years of example, which is that you don't discuss the mill inside the mill. What's overheard gets reported. What gets reported gets consequences. The consequences in this mill are the kind that don't require Simcox to raise his voice. Fewer hours, worse positions, the kind of record that follows you when you try to find work elsewhere. Manchester is a small city in the ways that matter. But at noon, when the bell rings and the frames don't exactly stop, they slow. They shudder into a kind of idling, the main shaft still turning but the frames disengaged. When the bell rings and you have 30 minutes for your midday meal, you find Owen at the door to the stairwell. He's holding his hand. "Let me see," you say. He shakes his head. "Owen." He shows you. It's not as bad as the blood suggested. The skin broken across 2 knuckles, not deep, already crusting. Something caught him, a roller or a belt, and grazed him rather than grabbed him. If it had grabbed him, you would not be having this conversation. "When?" you ask. "This morning, before you came in." "Did Simcox see?" Owen shakes his head again. "Keep it covered," you say. "The inspector's gone. Wash it tonight." He looks at you. He's 12. He has the face of someone 4 years younger in shape. Round cheeks, wide eyes, with the expression of someone 4 years older. The expression of someone who has already understood certain things about the world that 12-year-olds in other circumstances aren't usually asked to understand. "The inspector wrote things," he says. "He did." "Do you think—" "I don't know," you say, which is honest. "Come on, we've got 20 minutes left." The street outside the mill gate is, for 30 minutes around noon, a different thing from what it is the rest of the day. The flow of workers from Cardwell's and from the 2 other mills within a street's radius creates a temporary crowd, a mill noon crowd, and the vendors who understand this economy have positioned themselves accordingly. A woman with a basket of pies. The pies are hot. She's kept them warm on a small brazier, the coals banked down in the way of someone who does this every day. And they smell of potato and something that is almost certainly not the meat named on the handwritten sign beside her. But they are hot, and they are cheap, and hot and cheap is what you need right now. You buy 2. One for yourself, one for Owen, who protests and then eats his in 4 bites. You eat yours more slowly. The potato filling is dense and bland and exactly what tired muscles want. Something heavy, something filling, something that gives your body fuel without requiring it to think about flavour. The pastry is grey. Everything in Manchester is grey. You lean against the brick wall of a building across from the mill gate and look up. The sky, or what you can see of it between the buildings and beneath the permanent cloud of mill smoke, is a lightish grey. Different from the darker grey of the smoke, somewhere up there, above all of it, there's presumably a June sky of some quality. You haven't seen a genuine blue sky since you arrived in England. You've seen clear days, days when the smoke is thinner, or the wind is coming from a direction that briefly clears the canyon between the buildings, and on those days there's a pale grey-white that might be sky, or might just be higher altitude smoke, and you've decided to call it sky because you need something. Back home, you don't say back home very often, not out loud, because it opens something you can't afford to leave open during a working day. But back home in Roscommon, the sky in June was a particular shade of blue that you have no equivalent for in the palette of Manchester. A thin, almost transparent blue, like blue cloth held up to the light, with clouds that were actual white, not the yellowish grey of Manchester clouds. You ate in fields there. You ate outside in daylight. Here you eat standing up against a brick wall in a canyon of mills, with half a pie and 20 minutes before the bell. You eat the rest of the pie. Owen sits beside you on the curb. Do you think they'll change anything, he asks. The inspectors? The new act? This is a bigger conversation than 20 minutes allows for. But Owen is 12 and asking a real question, and deserves a real answer. They've changed some things, you say, the ages, the hours, but they don't enforce it. They're starting to. That man this morning wrote things in his book. Yes. Owen is quiet. His hand has stopped bleeding. He's flexing the fingers carefully, testing them. Midday says it'll take the charter, he says. The charter. The People's Charter. 6 points, written down by men who believed that working people deserved the vote, deserved representation in Parliament, deserved the ability to change the laws that governed them through something other than simply suffering under them. You've heard about the Charter. Everyone in Angel Meadow has heard about the Charter. The question of what you think about the Charter in certain company is a question that has consequences. Chartism makes mill owners nervous, makes magistrates nervous, makes the kind of people who employ the kind of people who live in cellars in Angel Meadow very nervous indeed. So it is a question you answer carefully, depending on who's asking. Owen is 12 and he works for Cardwell's, and he has a bleeding hand. Your da might not be wrong, you say. The bell rings. You go back inside. The afternoon has a different quality from the morning. The morning has momentum, the beginning of things, the body warming up, the mind engaging with the routine. The afternoon, starting around 2 o'clock, after the brief break and the pie and the brief exposure to a sky that is at least technically sky. The afternoon is a different animal. It is long. It is hot. The temperature in the spinning room, which was 85 degrees at 7, is now somewhere north of 90, because the sun is on the south side of the building and the wall has been absorbing heat for 7 hours and releasing it inward, and the machines themselves generate heat as a byproduct of their operation, and the bodies of several hundred workers generate heat as a byproduct of their existence. You sweat. Constantly, steadily, the way the walls sweat, the way the windows sweat, a faint beading of moisture on every surface. Your shirt, already damp from the morning, takes on the particular clinging quality of wet linen. The back of your neck is slick. The inside of your wrists, which are at the machinery constantly, pick up machine oil on the downstrokes. Machine oil smells of iron and the particular chemical sweetness of refined mineral products, and it mixes with cotton dust on your skin to create a paste-like greyish coating that accumulates over the course of the shift and which you noticed on yourself this morning in the cracked looking glass, and which you will notice again tomorrow morning and the morning after that. This is what soot looks like when it's not technically soot. This is what it looks like when it's a combination of cotton dust and machine oil and mill smoke, and the simple exhalation of a building working at capacity. It looks the same. It feels the same. It's in your hair the same way. In the lines of your hands the same way. You are a person who works in a cotton mill in 1844 Manchester. Grey is your natural state. At 3 in the afternoon, you make a mistake. Not a catastrophic one. Not a finger-losing mistake, but a mistake. You're moving down the row from your frame to cover for Eliza, who's had to step out. A girl thing, a privacy thing that the mill's architecture provides no privacy for, and the culture of the mill provides no discretion about. Another item on the long list of indignities that Cardwell's distributes with industrial efficiency. And in moving quickly, you misjudge the clearance on your left, and your elbow catches the frame. Not the moving parts, the frame itself, the iron housing. But hard enough that for a moment your elbow goes numb from the impact, and your next 3 or 4 piercings are done slightly wrong because you can't feel your fingers properly, and one of those threads breaks again almost immediately, and you have to reach back in and redo it. Simcox is watching. You can feel his watch on you. Not literally, so he's across the room, but there's a weight to being observed in this place that you can feel on your skin. You do the repiece cleanly, efficiently, without looking over at him. You move back to your frame. You keep moving. You don't look at him. Later, at 4, at your 5-minute water break, he finds you. 3rd floor's up 2% on waste thread this week, he says. This is not necessarily true. You don't have access to the numbers. Neither, truthfully, does Simcox, who measures by instinct and report rather than by actual calculation. But it's what he says. I'll be careful, Mr. Simcox. See that you are, and the water break is 5 minutes. It has been 4 minutes and 40 seconds. You put down the tin cup. 4 o'clock. 5. 6. The light through the grimy windows, which has been doing its best all day to communicate the passage of time from the outside world. The outside world that has a sun and a sky and things happening in it that have nothing to do with cotton thread, begins by 6 to take on a slightly warmer quality. Not gold, not in Manchester, but a diluted amber, the colour of very weak tea, filtering through smoke and glass and years of accumulated grime to arrive at the frames as something almost warm-toned. You notice it. You always notice it. This shift in light is the only natural clock you have in here. The only thing that confirms that the day outside has a shape, that it proceeds according to some logic other than Simcox's watch. By 7, the light is gone. Gas jets on the walls take over. They hiss and gutter and produce a yellowish light that makes everyone look vaguely unwell, which is not an artistic distortion. Everyone in here is vaguely unwell, in the technical sense of the word. Not sick exactly, not sick enough to stop, but operating on a deficit of sleep and food and air and light that compounds day by day into something that will, years from now, become a very specific accounting. 7:30. The bell. Not the midday bell. The end of shift bell. The frames wind down. Not gracefully. There's a period of clanking and mechanical complaint as the tension goes out of things, as the spindles slow and stop, as the drive shaft disengages. In the sudden relative quiet, relative because it's never actually quiet in the mill, Even at rest it ticks and breathes. In the relative quiet you become aware of your own body again. Your hands ache. A deep ache, not sharp. The ache of sustained repetitive motion, of muscles used precisely the same way thousands of times. Your lower back, which spent the day in the slight forward lean of someone watching machinery at waist height, has opinions. Your feet, which stood on stone floor for 14 hours, you subtract the breaks and it comes to 13 hours and 8 minutes, by your count, which is 2 more than the new act says is legal for someone your age, but no one is counting that count. Your feet are simply beyond opinion. They are in a category of experience that language doesn't quite accommodate. You clean your frame. This is required. You sweep the accumulated cotton fluff from the housing, wipe the rollers with the provided cloth, leave things in the state they need to be in for the morning shift, which starts in 8.5 hours. Then you collect your wages. This is the part of the day that is administratively simple and emotionally complex. You present yourself at the counting window, where a clerk named Price, who has the specific pallor of someone who works in a counting room and sees even less sunlight than you do, and who seems personally affronted by the existence of workers who require payment, presents you with a small paper slip. You look at the slip. You look at it again. Price is already moving to the next worker. "Excuse me," you say. He stops. His expression is the expression of a man for whom every stoppage is an affront. "This is docked," you say. The number on the slip is not the number you calculated in your head during the quiet moments of the afternoon. It is less, by enough that it matters. "Irregular thread waste," Price says. He says it the way you might say flaw. A fact, a simple given, nothing requiring further explanation. The waste count is noted by the overlooker and submitted to the counting office. He's already looking past you. "I'd like to know what count was submitted." "You'll receive what's on the slip, Byrne." That's all. The conversation, in Price's view, is over. He moves to the next worker. You stand there for a moment. You have done the arithmetic. The difference between what's on the slip and what you expected is 6 pence. 6 pence is 2 meals. 6 pence is a small thing in the abstract, and an enormous thing when you're living on a margin where 6 pence is not abstract at all. You could argue. You could demand to see the overlooker's report. You could cite the specific protocol in the mill handbook. You have read the mill handbook because you're the kind of person who reads mill handbooks, because information is armour, that gives workers the right to contest wage deductions. You could do all of these things, and next week Simcox's eye would find you differently. You pocket the slip and walk out. The street outside the mill gate in the evening is the street outside the mill gate in the morning, reversed and amplified. Everyone is tired. The specific tiredness of mill work is a physical state that sleep helps but doesn't completely resolve. You carry it forward, night to night, the way you carry any accumulating debt forward, and the faces around you show it. The set of the jaw, the quality of the eyes, the slight forward lean that you see in long shift workers the way you see the waterline on the cellar wall. You walk with the crowd for a bit, then peel off. You don't go directly home. You haven't gone directly home on a Thursday in about 3 months. On Thursdays, on most Thursdays, when there's a meeting, you go to the room above the Black Horse on St. George's Road. You go to the Chartists. The first time you went, it was because Bridget's husband, Bridget from your cellar, whose husband Fionnuala had left Ireland 6 months before you and established himself in Manchester with enough stability to send for her and their daughter. Bridget's husband had been going for 2 years and mentioned it to you one Sunday morning the way you might mention a place where the food is good or the company is decent. "Come along if you want," he'd said. "It's talking mostly, but it's useful talking." You went, expecting something. You weren't sure what. Manchester had a reputation for radicalism that preceded itself. The Peterloo massacre was 25 years ago, but people still mentioned it. Still mentioned it the way you mention a wound that's scarred over but not forgotten. And you'd assumed the Chartist meetings would have some of that quality. Something confrontational. Something the colour of danger. They were, in fact, largely men sitting in a room above a pub talking, but the talking... You've heard a lot of talking in your life. Talking in the fields at home, talking on the docks at Liverpool, talking in the cellar, talking across machines you couldn't hear over. Most of it is the talking of people managing their immediate circumstances, what to do today, tonight, tomorrow. Practical talking, survival talking. The Chartist meeting was different. These men, and a few women always in the back rows mostly, occasionally standing up to say something with a precision and force that silenced the room. These people were talking about the architecture, not the architecture of mills or buildings, but the architecture of the situation itself, the structure of the thing that produced Price and his counting window, and Simcox's watch, and the water line on the cellar wall, and Tommy Walsh's missing finger joint. They were talking about why it was the way it was, and whether it had to be. The room above the Black Horse is long and low, with exposed beams that you have to duck under if you're above average height, and a smell of accumulated pipe smoke and damp wool and ale from the floor below that comes up through the boards and becomes part of the air. There are maybe 40 people here tonight, the usual mix, spinners and weavers mostly, some framework knitters from the Ancoats area, a printer's apprentice, slightly named Daniel who always has ink on his wrist, several Irish. Manchester's Irish population is enormous, something like 30 or 40,000 in a city of 250,000, a proportion that has been growing rapidly as conditions back home worsen. And Chartism has found particular purchase in the Irish community, for reasons that don't require much explanation. A man named Joshua Hobhouse is speaking when you come in. You know Hobhouse, know him well enough to know that he is a weaver who's been making this kind of speech for 20 years, and who has the specific relationship to rhetoric that comes from 20 years of practice. He doesn't always say something new, but he says it with a precision that makes it feel new. What they're asking for, Hobhouse is saying, is not revolution. It's not violence. It's this. He holds up a printed sheet. The Charter, 6 points. You know them by now. Universal male suffrage. Secret ballot. No property qualification for MPS. Payment of MPS. Equal constituencies. Annual parliaments. 6 things. 6 things that any person with a functioning conscience would look at and say, yes, these are reasonable. He pauses. He's good at pauses. And instead, a man who works 12 hours on a machine, 14, 16 if his employer wants it, that man cannot vote for the parliament that passes the laws that govern his working hours. He cannot vote for the man who decides whether a factory inspector has teeth or no teeth. He cannot vote for anything. The room is quiet in the specific way of a room that is listening. The mill owner votes, the mill owner's friends vote, the mill owner's brother-in-law who's never set foot on a spinning floor votes, and you, he looks around the room, you do not. You feel something shift in your chest. Not new, you felt it before in this room, but tonight, with Simcox's watch still in your body, and Price's slip in your pocket, and Owen's bloody hand in your memory, it's more present than usual. It's not anger, or not only anger, it's something more specific, the recognition of a shape, the moment when you understand that the individual pieces of your day, the late clock, the docked wages, the inspector who writes but changes nothing, the child on the factory floor, these are not separate unluckinesses. They're the same thing, wearing different faces. A woman stands up from the second row. You know her by sight. Sarah Partington works at a mill in Ancoats, has been speaking at these meetings for longer than you've been attending them. I want to talk about the women, she says. Her voice is matter-of-fact. The voice of someone who has had to establish her right to speak in rooms like this many times and has found the most efficient path to doing it. Because the Charter says universal male suffrage, and I'm told we're to wait our turn, and I'm tired of being told to wait my turn. Some shifting in the room, not all of it comfortable. Hobhouse makes a small gesture, not dismissive but moderating. The fight for the vote, someone begins, is a fight that affects me, Partington says, since my wages are affected by the same laws, since my hours are governed by the same parliament, since my children work on the same floors. A pause. I'll take the 6 points. I'll take them. And then we come back and we have this conversation again. Hobhouse nods slowly. He's a pragmatist about certain things and an idealist about others, and you've learned, in 3 months of attending, to identify which things are which. Sarah's right, he says, and Sarah's also right that we take the 6 points first, because the 6 points are what we have. He holds up the Charter again. This is a document that says, working people have the right to shape the laws they live under. Nothing more, nothing less. What we do with that right when we have it is a conversation we get to have. He's quiet for a moment. Right now, we don't get to have it. The meeting goes for an hour and a half. There's argument. There's always argument. That's partly the point. The Chartist meeting is one of the very few spaces in Manchester where the kind of argument that produces changed minds, rather than changed nothing, is considered not just permitted, but required. There's argument about tactics. The petition approach, which has been tried twice and presented to Parliament twice, and rejected twice, with a thoroughness that bordered on contempt. The physical force faction, which makes some people in the room nervous, and other people in the room emphatically not nervous. The argument about whether the Anti-Corn Law League, the middle-class free trade movement that is also meeting in Manchester, is also making demands of Parliament, is also arguing that the current system needs changing. Whether that movement is an ally or a different kind of enemy, you listen. You don't speak often in these meetings. Not because you have nothing to say. You have a great deal to say, and occasionally in the walk home afterward you say it to yourself, or to Bridget's husband if he's been there, running arguments through their paces, but because you are 16 and Irish and new to the room, and you understand the hierarchy of who gets to speak in this room the way you understand the hierarchy at Cardwell's. You are at the bottom of both. You are working your way up slowly, the way you work your way up at anything, by showing up, by listening, by doing the things that need to be done. You collect pamphlets when they need collecting. You carry messages. You know the streets, and knowing the streets is its own kind of useful. Tonight, at the end of the meeting, Hobhouse catches you near the door. You heard anything at Cardwell's about the inspector? News travels fast in this world. Not through newspapers, though the newspapers are there. the Northern Star, the most read paper of the radical working class, Fergus O'Connor's paper, printed in Leeds and read everywhere, but through people, through the network of who talks to whom. He came in today, you say, wrote things. They always write things. There's a boy on my floor, 12 years old, hurt his hand. The inspector saw. Hobhouse is quiet, 38 years old, the face of someone who has been angry for a long time and learned to shape it into something useful. The act says many things, you say. It comes out more sharply than you intended. Hobhouse looks at you. Then he laughs. Not a large laugh, a short recognition. No, he says, it does. He hands you a folded pamphlet. Take that. There's a meeting next Thursday with a man from the Manchester Guardian. Not sympathetic, but fair. Wants to hear from mill workers. He looks at you. You're 16. Yes. You can speak to what you've seen, what the hours are, what the conditions are. Will you come? You hold the pamphlet. Will you come? You think about Price's counting window, and the 6 pence, and Simcox's watch, and Owen's hand, and the water line on the cellar wall. Yes, you say, outside. The streets of Manchester at 9 in the evening have a different quality from the streets at 6 in the morning. Both are dark. The gas lamps on the main streets do what they can, but they're sparse, and the alleys between them are the deep urban dark of a city with very little light to spare. But the morning dark has an urgency that the evening dark lacks. The morning dark is moving. The evening dark is sedentary. People move differently. The mill workers are mostly in by now, or still working. Those on the 12-hour shifts that end at 10, or the ones on continuous shifts where there is no end, only handoff. And the streets have started to fill with the evening trade. Pubs mostly. Manchester has a pub on every corner, in some cases on every corner and midway along the block, in the way of a city that has correctly identified that the most reliable product in an industrial working population is the desire to feel something other than what your day has made you feel. You pass the 3 crowns, from which noise and light emanate in equal quantity. Through the window briefly a tableau. Men at tables, the orange flicker of lamp, and fire, the steam of warm bodies and warm drinks. You think about going in. You have the money from today's slip in your pocket, less than it should be, but there. You have the pamphlet from Hobhouse. You have Owen's face in your memory, and the inspector's notebook, and Sarah Partington saying, "I'll take the 6 points." You keep walking. Angel Meadow, late at night, is different from Angel Meadow at any other time in a way that is difficult to describe precisely. During the day, it is relentlessly itself, crowded, smelling, busy with the traffic of people who live on the edge of things, and are managing that edge with varying degrees of success. At night, with the mills quieter and the main foot traffic moved to the pubs, it achieves something that isn't quite silence. There is no silence in Angel Meadow, but a kind of muffled density. The sounds of people living in close proximity, conversations through thin walls, a baby crying 2 doors up, someone's boots on cobblestones 2 streets over, a cart. The Year Well, which runs along the western edge of the area you're walking through, smells strongest at night, when the day's industrial contribution has had time to settle into the water, and the night air tends to lie still rather than carry things away. The Irwell in 1844 is not technically a river. It is a record. It records what the factories put into it. The dyes, the chemicals, the waste streams from dozens of industrial processes. And it presents this record continuously, through smell and colour and the specific visual quality of water that has been thoroughly industrialised. Friedrich Engels, 23 years old, newly arrived in Manchester from Germany, working at his family's cotton business, taking notes. Friedrich Engels, who will publish his observations about the city in 1 year's time, describes the Irwell as a narrow, coal-black, foul-smelling stream. He is being polite. You cross the footbridge over it, and the smell rises up through the planks and you breathe through your mouth, as you always do on this bridge, and then you're past it and the smell recedes to background. Thomas Street, the door that sticks, your shoulder into it. The cellar is dark. Bridget has left a stub of candle on the shelf. Her particular economical kindness, the shortest usable length of candle, enough to see by for 10 minutes before getting into bed, and you light it from the embers in the small brazier in the corner that she keeps going through the evenings and banks down before sleep. The light throws up the familiar dimensions, 12 feet, 14 feet. The sleeping shapes of the people already here, Pat, home from somewhere, face down and snoring. Flynn, with his greenish cast visible even in candlelight. Bridget in her corner, Mare in her small space beside her mother. You sit on the mattress and take off your boots. Your feet, freed from the boots, communicate several hours of unaddressed grievance. You rub them with your thumbs, pressing into the arch, working the specific soreness of standing. The stone floor of the spinning room is the enemy of human feet in a very direct and sustained way, and your feet have been losing this argument for over a year. You look at your hands in the candlelight, grey, cracked at the knuckles. The right index finger has a small scar. Not like Tommy's, not that. Just a thin white line from 3 months ago when you were new and not quite fast enough, and a roller caught you at an angle. It's healed. The finger works fine, but the scar is there, white in the candlelight, a small permanent note. You unfold Hobhouse's pamphlet. The candlelight is not quite enough to read by properly. It flickers with every movement of air in the room, of which there is plenty, but you can make out the broad strokes. A printed essay, the case for the charter. The language is formal but not inaccessible, the language of people who have learned to make arguments rather than simply feel them. The labouring man has built what he cannot enter. He has woven what he cannot wear. He has built the exchange in which his product is sold, and he has no vote in choosing the men who will decide the price. You read that twice. Lay back. Above you, the ceiling is close. The floor of the room above. The better room, the drier room, the room that costs more, transfers its sounds downward. The creak of a chair, someone's cough, the particular domestic sound of a household in the process of ending its day. The candle gutters. You close your eyes. The day runs backward in brief images. Price's window, Owen's hand, the inspector's notebook. Sarah Partington saying, "I'll take the 6 points." Eliza at the frame with her particular economy of movement. Simcox's watch, the pie, the grey sky, the grey bread, the grey water in the grey basin, the grey. This is what it looks like, this hinge point in history, this engine room of the world. From outside, from the perspective of investors and shareholders and the people who commission the architecture and write the newspaper accounts of Manchester's extraordinary industrial achievement, it looks like progress. It looks like the future arriving. It looks like human ingenuity working at its absolute maximum. From inside, from 14 feet below the street, from the 3rd floor of a cotton mill, from the specific perspective of someone whose lungs are counting their cotton particles and whose wages were docked 6 pence today for reasons that were not clearly explained. From inside, it looks like something else. Not the absence of progress. That's not quite right either. It looks like the question, progress toward what? And for whom? These are the questions that the men and women in the room above the black horse are asking. These are the questions that are going to get louder over the next decade, the next half century, the next century. These are the questions that will eventually, haltingly, imperfectly, produce the world that exists now. The world where you are, in whatever position you've placed yourself, listening to this. The gap between that world and this one is immense. The gap between the factory floor in 1844 Manchester and anything you would recognise as reasonable is a gap so large that if you could see it all at once, it would be hard to believe you were looking at the same species of people on both ends. But the people who crossed that gap, the ones who did the crossing, not the ones who sat on one side and waited for the other side to get closer, they started somewhere. They started in rooms like this one, above a pub on St. George's Road, in the back of a church hall, on a street corner in the rain handing out pamphlets. They started here. Sleep comes unevenly in the cellar, the way sleep always comes in a place where 8 people are sharing the air and the noise and the cold. It comes in stages. First the surface thoughts quieting, the day's account finally settled into something you're not actively adding to. Then the body's arithmetic completing itself, the ache in your feet becoming background, the ache in your hands becoming background, the ache in your back finding a position that makes it momentarily irrelevant. You sink. The morning comes too soon, as it always does, as it will tomorrow, as it did yesterday. But something is different now. Not different in the way of changed circumstances. You are still Seamus Byrne, still 16, still in the cellar on Thomas Street, still employed at Cardwell's for a wage that was 6 pence short today, and might be 6 pence short again tomorrow. Different in a smaller, more interior way. You have a meeting next Thursday. You have a pamphlet. You have a thing you're going to say to a man from the Manchester Guardian. Something about what 12-hour shifts look like from the inside. Something about what it costs a human body to piece cotton thread for 45 hours a week. Something about Owen and his hand and the inspector who wrote things but went away. That's not nothing. Sunday. The word has a different weight here than it did at home. At home, Sunday was a day with a specific texture, the particular quality of light through a church window, the smell of candle wax and damp stone, the rhythm of prayer in Irish that your grandmother knew by heart and your mother knew almost by heart, and you knew the shape of without knowing all the words. Sunday was a cessation, a day that stopped itself, deliberately and with community agreement, and said, "Not today. Today is different." In Manchester, Sunday is still technically Sunday. The mills close. The law says they close, and unlike the Factory Act's 12-hour provisions, the Sunday closing rules have actual teeth, because the people who enforce them are also the people who go to church, and church attendance in Manchester in 1844 is less a spiritual practice than a social performance, and the mill owners are as invested in that performance as anyone. But the city doesn't stop. The streets don't stop. The Irwell doesn't stop flowing its particular chemical memoir. The babies in the buildings around you don't stop needing things. The hunger doesn't stop. Sunday is the day when the gap between the lives that happen inside the mills and the lives that happen outside them is visible in a different way. because on Sunday you can see the mills from the outside. You can see them as buildings, as objects, as things occupying space in a city rather than as the entire horizon of your existence. You haven't done enough of that. You haven't looked at Manchester properly, in the sense of deliberately going somewhere and looking at it as a thing, rather than simply moving through it as a condition of being alive. You've been too tired, mostly, too focused on the next day, the next shift, the next sixpence. This Sunday, you're going to look at it. You wake at 6:30, which for a Sunday morning is almost extravagant. Your body doesn't know it's Sunday. Your body knows only that it has been woken at 5:30 every weekday for over a year, and that 6:30 therefore feels like the middle of the afternoon. You lie there for a few minutes anyway, because lying there is a luxury, and you have decided to take it. The cellar is quieter than usual. Bridget is already up. You can hear her moving in the kitchen corner, but Pat is still asleep, and Flynn and Mare. Sunday mornings have their own drowsy character in the cellar. The absence of the usual urgency changes the quality of the air somehow. Or maybe that's just the absence of anxiety, which has its own smell, its own specific weight. You wash more carefully than you do on weekdays. You have time. The basin water is cold, it's always cold, but you take your time with it, working the cloth over the backs of your hands, into the knuckles, across your face, behind your ears. The water in the basin goes grey within 30 seconds. You change it. Use the rest of the jug. You find your Sunday shirt, which is better than your work shirt the way that relative measurements work when the scale is compressed. It has fewer stains, fewer repairs, and was last washed 4 days ago rather than 14. You put it on over your work trousers, because you own one pair of trousers, and they are what they are. Bridget hands you a bowl of porridge without being asked. You eat it at the table, actually sitting at the table, because it's Sunday and the table is available, and the porridge is hot and bland and exactly what it is, which is fuel, and you are grateful for it in the specific way of someone who has learned that gratitude for food is not a performance, but a response to a concrete condition of existence. Mare is sitting across from you, braiding something, a piece of rag, a child's complicated project, with her small, quick fingers. She's 9. In this neighbourhood, 9 is not quite childhood, and not quite not childhood. She goes to the ragged school on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, when she doesn't have work. She's learning to read, with a fierce concentration that you recognised immediately when you first saw it, because it's the same concentration you brought to reading. Back home, when reading was something people around you did cautiously, understanding its relationship to danger and power. "Where are you going?" she asks, without looking up from her braiding. "To look at the city." She looks up now, 9-year-old assessment. "You're already in the city." "I know. I want to look at it from somewhere high." She considers this, weighs it against whatever her 9-year-old understanding of purpose and sensible expenditure of a Sunday morning looks like. "Will you tell me what you see?" "When I get back," you say. She goes back to her braiding. You finish your porridge. The plan, such as it is, came from something Hobhouse said in passing at the last meeting but one. He'd been talking about Manchester's geography, the way the land lies, the hills to the north and east that the mills have been claiming steadily for 50 years, the river valleys that the factories occupied first because the water was useful and the land was cheap, and he'd mentioned a place, Kersal Moor, 2 miles north of the city centre, high enough and open enough that on a clear day, which this is not precisely, but clear enough by Manchester standards, which means only. Medium smoke rather than heavy smoke. On a clear enough day, you can see the whole of Manchester laid out below you. Hobhouse had been to a Chartist rally there 6 years ago. The largest rally in Manchester's history, he said. 300,000 people on that moor. 300,000, which was more people than the city itself contained, which meant people had come from everywhere, from every mill town within a day's walk, from Stockport and Bury and Bolton and Oldham, to stand on the hill and listen to Fergus O'Connor speak. 300,000 people. You try to imagine that. The spinning room at Cardwell's holds 400. The meeting room above the Black Horse holds 40. 300,000 is a number that your experience has not yet given you the tools to feel properly. But you're going to the moor anyway. The walk north through Manchester is a geography lesson delivered at foot speed. You leave Angel Meadow, the cramped courts, the cellar dwellings, the permanent chemical smell of the earwell on your left, and you move through the city in a way that demonstrates something about how Manchester works, which is that it works in layers. Not horizontal layers exactly, but layers of function and class that are also, roughly, layers of geography. Angel Meadow is the bottom. Not the bottom in the sense of the worst. There are parts of Manchester that are worse. Streets in the Deansgate area and the Irish rookeries around Oldham Road, where the density of people per square foot of habitation has achieved something that you'd describe as impossible, except you've seen it, so you know it isn't. But in Angel Meadow you are at the functional floor of the economy. The mill workers, the casual labourers, the family surviving on 3 people's wages in a basement room. Moving north and west, the city shifts, not gradually. Manchester doesn't do gradual. It does abrupt. One street is courts and cellar dwellings. The next street is smaller merchants, 2-room houses, people who own things. The street after that, if you angle slightly toward the main road, toward Deansgate, toward Market Street, the street after that is shop fronts and offices and the beginning of the city that doesn't need to apologise for itself. You pass through all of these. Market Street on a Sunday morning has a particular quality. The shops are shuttered, most of them. The trading standards, people are serious about Sunday trading. But the street itself is open, and without the weekday crowd of carts and horses and commercial traffic, you can see its structure more clearly, the width of it, the ambition of it. Market Street was remade 30 years ago. Before that, it was a medieval scramble of timber buildings leaning over each other across a narrow lane. In 1821, the corporation and the improving classes of Manchester decided that a city of this size and this importance needed a main street commensurate with that importance, and they knocked down the medieval scramble and built this, 60 feet wide, proper paving, properly grandly proportioned shop fronts. This is Manchester saying, we are serious, we are modern, we are not a collection of mills attached to a village, we are a city. You walk down the middle of it, because on a Sunday morning you can. Because on a Sunday morning there are no carts and no coaches and no sedan chairs. Actually, there are no sedan chairs. Those belong to an earlier century. This is 1844 and the sedan chair is largely gone. No urgent commercial traffic, and you can walk down the middle of Market Street like a person of consequence. This feeling lasts approximately until you reach the junction with Cross Street, where a group of churchgoers moving in the other direction takes up most of the available space and you step aside. But for those 30 seconds of walking down the middle of Market Street, that's something. North of the city centre, the character changes again. The mills become less frequent. They don't disappear. Nothing in Manchester's orbit is ever entirely free of the mill economy, but they thin out, and in their place come slightly larger buildings on slightly larger plots, the houses of people who have profited from the mills without standing in them, merchants, factors, the professional class that the Industrial Revolution requires to manage itself. Some of these houses are genuinely impressive. Stone frontages, small gardens, windows that reflect light rather than absorbing it. You look at them with the specific attention of someone who has been measuring rooms since he arrived. The people who live in these houses are not, in the main, bad people. This is something you've thought about quite a bit, especially since the Chartist meeting started giving you a language for the structural rather than the personal. The mill owner who docks your wages is not, in most cases, in the cases you can observe, doing it out of cruelty. He's doing it out of the logic of his position, which is that his position requires him to extract maximum value from minimum input, and you are an input. The system that makes this true is not primarily a system of bad people. It's a system of incentives, and the incentives are pointing in a consistent direction. This doesn't make the 6 pence less missing, but it's useful to know. It means the argument isn't about convincing people to stop being cruel. It's about changing what's rational, what the system rewards. The Charter, Hobhouse says, is the first step in changing what the system rewards. Because if you can vote, then your vote is part of what politicians need. And if your vote is part of what politicians need, then your interests become part of what the system has to account for. In theory, you keep walking. Selford on a Sunday morning is quieter even than Manchester on a Sunday morning, which is saying something. To get to Kersal Moor, you cross the River Irwell again, this time the main channel, the wider version, on Blackfriars Bridge. The bridge is stone, properly built, maintained by the borough in a way that the streets aren't necessarily maintained because bridges are infrastructure that wealthy people also need, and so they get the funding. Below the bridge, the Irwell is at low water. You can see the mud of the riverbank, a dark chemical mud that smells of everything the river has received and held on to. On the mud, near the eastern bank, there are 2 boys doing something that might be looking for objects. Mudlarking, the practice of wading in river mud to find things that have fallen in and might be worth selling. They are knee-deep in the mud. Their legs, up to the knee, are the colour of the river. Their faces are upturned briefly as you pass overhead, then down again, focused on the mud. The Irwell takes things in and sometimes gives them back. The ground begins to rise north of Salford. Not dramatically. This is not a dramatic landscape, Manchester and its surrounds. No mountains or cliffs or anything that requires naming, but definitely rising. The street tilting upward under your feet in a way that your calves register. After a week of flat mill floors, uphill is a novelty. The houses thin further, the gardens get larger. The air, and this is not imagination, this is actual physics, the thermal behaviour of smoke in a valley versus smoke on a hillside. The air begins to change, not clean. Don't imagine clean, but different, less dense. The smoke is still present but attenuated, distributed, and the predominant smell starts to shift away from the chemical baseline of the city towards something older. Wet grass. Mud of the field variety rather than the river variety. Sheep, somewhere nearby, their particular wool and manure smell drifting on the wind. You're nearly there. The moor opens up in front of you like an argument. It's not beautiful exactly. Not in the way that beauty usually announces itself. It's a wide open space of rough grass and gorse and exposed rock, the kind of land that agriculture found unworkable and industry has not yet found a use for, and so it has remained itself. Untouched, undeveloped, inconveniently high, and inconveniently open. It's enormous. You forget living in Angel Meadow that space exists in this quantity. In Angel Meadow, space is measured in the increments of cellar rooms and alleyways, and the narrow strip of sky between buildings. Space is the commodity that the poor cannot afford and the rich consume in excess. Space is always, implicitly, someone else's. Up here, space is just space. You stand at the edge of the moor for a moment and breathe. The wind is coming from the west, which is the direction of clean air relative to Manchester, the prevailing westerly that keeps the smoke moving east and gives the western approach to the city the slight respite of comparative freshness. On your face it's cold and damp with the particular moisture of moorland air. You pull your coat tighter and walk forward. The view from the high point of Kersal Moor is something you will remember for the rest of your life. It comes to you gradually, as you climb. Not a dramatic revelation, but a progressive assembling, each step revealing more, the way a painting is revealed when you step back from it. And then you're at the top and you stop and you just look. Manchester, the whole of it, or nearly. What the smoke haze and the limited visibility of a June morning in the Industrial Revolution will allow you to see, which is more than you expected. The valley below you, the ear will catching what light there is and giving it back silver grey, the bridges across it, and then the city itself, a compressed density of buildings that extends further in every direction than feels reasonable, that appears to have no boundary except the hills where you're standing, and the hills you can faintly see to the south and east, and above the city. This is the thing. This is what you can't properly understand until you see it from up here. Above the city, the smoke. You've lived inside the smoke. You've breathed it, worn it, tasted it. You've understood it intellectually as the product of 400 mil chimneys burning coal continuously for the better part of a century. But from up here, you can see it as a thing, as a single entity, a ceiling of grey-brown that begins roughly at chimney height and extends upward and outward until it merges with the actual clouds somewhere above you, producing the consistent overcast that Manchester experiences as its default sky. It's not small. It covers from up here the entire extent of the visible city, not just the mill district, not just Angel Meadow, the whole of it, the respectable houses of the merchants. The church steeples. You can see 3 from here, their stone fingers poking up through the smoke as if making a point. The ornate bulk of the Royal Exchange, where cotton prices are set and fortunes made, its classical facade invisible, but its dome just distinguishable above the surrounding rooftops. All of it under the same ceiling. The smoke doesn't know about class distinctions. The smoke settles on the merchant's house the same way it settles on the cellar room. You stand there. The wind moves across the moor. The grass bends. Below you, Manchester keeps going. It has been going since the first mill was built in the 1780s, when your grandparents were alive, when this hillside was probably visible on clear days from the streets that are now buried under 60 years of additional construction. It will keep going after today. What happens to a city like this? You're looking at the question made physical. A system of tremendous productive power that has generated wealth on a scale that no previous period of human history has equalled, and simultaneously generated conditions of human existence that would, if they were understood fully by the people generating the wealth, require an explanation that would take up a lot of space. Unless they understood them fully and chose not to require an explanation. That's the other possibility. You sit down on the rough grass of the moor and look at the city for a long time. The Chartist rally of 1838, the one Hobhouse attended, the 300,000, happened on this specific piece of ground. You look at the grass under your hands, rough, wiry. The grass of a place that is too exposed for anything easier. 300,000 people stood here. There is no trace of them. Grass doesn't record crowds, or if it does, the recording fades within a season. But you know it happened, and knowing it gives the place a different quality. The way a place where something important happened has a different quality, even after the importance has gone from visible to historical. What would it feel like to be in a crowd of 300,000 people all wanting the same thing? You've been in crowds. Manchester is a city of crowds. The Mill morning crowd, the Mill noon crowd, the Market Street crowd. But those crowds are incidental. They happen because people need to go somewhere, and the streets channel them into proximity. They are not crowds of intention. What Hobhouse described, what you've heard described by others who were there, the Kersal Moor rally was a crowd of intention. 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 people who had come specifically to be there, to be counted, to occupy the same space and make visible by their occupation that space that this was not a small thing, that this was not the complaint of a few troublemakers, that this was the considered position of an enormous number of people who had decided that enough was enough and were now standing on a moor in the rain to say so. O'Connor spoke for 2 hours. You try to imagine what it sounds like to have a voice that carries to 300,000 people in an open field in 1838 before any form of amplification. You imagine it's mostly symbol. You imagine that the people at the edges heard very little, but being there, being counted, being part of the visible mass, that was the speech. Their bodies were the speech. Your body, sitting here now on the empty moor, is a much quieter version of the same sentence, but it's the same sentence. You eat the bread you brought, another piece from Bridget's oatmeal loaf, which has become, if anything, denser as the week progressed, and look at the city and think about the man from the Manchester Guardian coming to the Thursday meeting. What will you say? You've been thinking about this in the background of every shift since Hobhouse asked you. Not consciously, not with the deliberate effort of composition, but the way thought works when it's given time, running itself through the architecture of your experience, assembling things. What do you know that someone who reads the Manchester Guardian doesn't know? What does the Manchester Guardian reader know? He knows the production figures. He knows the export figures. He knows the arguments of the political economists who explain why the factory system, despite its apparent brutalities, produces the greatest good for the greatest number. He knows the arguments of the reformers who say it produces the greatest good for the smallest number. He knows these arguments because they have been conducted loudly and publicly in exactly the kind of language that reaches the Manchester Guardian. What he doesn't know, what he cannot know reading, is what it feels like when your hands stop belonging to you after hour 7 of a 12-hour shift, when they keep moving not because your mind directs them, but because stopping them has consequences that your body has decided are worse than the effort of continuing. When the thread breaks for the 80th time that day, and your hand goes out before the thought is complete, and you're no longer a person performing a task, but a task performing itself. He doesn't know what it smells like when the humidity jets on the ceiling spray water into hot air full of cotton dust and machine oil and several hundred people's exhalation. He doesn't know what Owen's hand looked like in the flat Thursday light of the spinning room. You know these things, that's what you'll say. Coming down from the moor is different from going up. The descent brings Manchester toward you in stages, the smoke ceiling lowering over your head as you lose altitude, the smell reasserting itself, the sounds of the city growing from distant to proximate. First the bells, it's Sunday and the churches are active. Then the ambient noise of habitation, the 1,000 small sounds of 250,000 people filling their one day of rest with the urgent business of being alive without the structure of work to organise them around. You re-enter the city through the northern side of Salford, which is different from the Angel Meadow side in the way that different parts of a single bad situation are different. Same problem, different room. Here the primary industry is not cotton but dye works and bleach works, and one of the slaughterhouse complexes that supplies the city's meat requirements. The smell is categorical. You keep moving, crossing back over the Irwell, the same bridge, the same grey water below. You look at the city from mid-span, which gives you a brief elevated view at the horizontal. The buildings of Manchester on one bank, the buildings of Salford on the other, the river between them carrying its chemical record toward the Mersey and the sea. A barge is moving downstream, slow and heavy, loaded with something covered in tarpaulin. The bargeman stands at the stern with a pole, working it with the practiced minimal effort of someone whose body has made this motion so many times that it ceased to require supervision. He doesn't look up as you watch him. Everyone in this city is moving. Everyone has somewhere to go, something to carry, something to deliver or retrieve. Even on Sunday the movement continues in a lower key. The river especially keeps moving. The river doesn't know about Sunday. In the afternoon, you find Owen, not by design, not initially, but by the geography of Angel Meadow, which is compact enough that finding people you know is less an achievement than a statistical inevitability. He's on a corner near the Oldham Road, with 2 other boys you don't recognise, doing the kind of nothing that children do when they have Sunday and nowhere particular to be. His hand looks better. The cloth wrapping is gone. The knuckles still have the slight raised colour of healing skin, but he's using the hand normally, gesturing with it, apparently unaware of it. You don't mention the hand. Seamus, he says. He still uses your proper name. Most people at Cardwell's have started calling you James, following Simcox's lead, because Seamus is, in the phonetic geography of Manchester, a source of confusion and occasional mockery, and James neutralises both. Owen uses your proper name because Owen is 12 and stubborn, and has not yet reached the part of his education where accommodation seems more efficient than principle. You hope he takes a long time getting there. Decent Sunday, you ask. He shrugs. Ma made us go to Mass. Then I came out. The other 2 boys are watching you with the assessment of children who haven't decided yet whether you're someone they need to have an opinion about. You nod at them. They nod back. Alliance of neutral parties. I went to Kersal Moor, you say to Owen. That lands differently. His face does the thing faces do when something unexpected arrives. A brief reorganisation. What for? To see the city. You could see the city from here. From up there you can see all of it, at once. He chews on this for a moment. He has a quality of thinking that you've noticed in the mill. the same quality that makes him good with the scavenger work, a deliberate gathering of information before committing to response. What did it look like? He asks. You think about how to answer that for a 12-year-old on a Sunday afternoon on a corner in Angel Meadow. Like something that was built too fast, you say. Like something that grew before anyone decided what shape it should be. Owen is quiet. My Da says it'll be twice as big in 20 years, he offers. He's probably right. Where do they put everyone? And this is the thing, isn't it? This is the question that Manchester is trying to answer in real time, with insufficient resources and inadequate planning, and the urgent pressure of a population that doubles every decade. Where do you put everyone? In rooms that hold too many? In buildings that cover the ground too densely? In a city that builds outward faster than it can build adequately? That's what people are working on, you say? Figuring that out. The Chartists. You look at him. He looks back, entirely unsurprised by your expression. My ma knows you go, he says. She told my dad, and my Dus said it was either brave or stupid. Ma said both. Your ma's probably right. Owen almost smiles. She usually is. That evening, back in the cellar, you sit at the table and write. You have a piece of paper, a single sheet, acquired at some cost from the printer's shop on Swan Street where Daniel works, the Chartist apprentice, and a stub of pencil. The paper is thin enough that you can see the grain of the table through it. You write slowly. Not because writing is difficult for you. You were taught by a hedge schoolmaster in Roscommon who took literacy seriously in the particular way of someone who understood that it was not available to everyone and should therefore be treated as the important thing it was. But because what you're writing is something you want to get right, and getting it right requires going slowly. My name is Seamus Byrne. I am 16 years old, from County Roscommon in Ireland. I have worked at Cardwell's fine cotton mill on Portland Street for 14 months in the position of piecer on the third floor spinning room. I want to tell you what that looks like. You stop. Look at the sentence. I want to tell you what that looks like. That's not quite right. It doesn't look like anything that will mean something to someone who hasn't been in it. You cross it out. Try again. I want to tell you what it feels like after 8 hours, when your hands have made the same motion several thousand times, and your body has stopped distinguishing between the motion and the resting state, because there is no resting state, because the machine doesn't rest, and if the machine doesn't rest, neither do you. Better, not perfect, but closer to the thing you want to give the man from the Manchester Guardian, which is not a report. Reports exist. The factory inspectors write reports. Parliament debates reports. Reports have the effect of being filed. What you want to write is something he can feel. You write for an hour. When you finish, you have filled both sides of the paper in your small close hand, and Bridget has put out the candle twice in the assumption that you are done, and you've asked her to light it again twice. And the third time she puts it out, you don't ask again because she needs her sleep. And so, you remind yourself, do you? You fold the paper and put it inside the pamphlet Hobhouse gave you. Thursday. The days between Sunday and Thursday follow the rhythm you know. Monday. The beginning of the week has a particular quality at Cardwell's, which is that Simcox arrives with whatever reserves of vigilance he accumulated over Sunday, and deploys them immediately. The overlooker on Monday morning is at his most present. His watch is most consulted. The distance between acceptable and unacceptable is narrowest. You are 3 minutes early. His watch says you are 30 seconds late. You say nothing. By 10 o'clock the rhythm of the machinery has reasserted its dominance, and Simcox has relaxed into his midweek mode, which is watchful but not aggressive. The frames run, the threads break, you piece them. Tuesday, a delivery arrives at Cardwell's, a large one, several cartloads of raw cotton bales, which require the ground floor workers and several men from outside to unload and store. The activity on the ground floor changes the quality of the vibration in the building, adds new sounds to the mechanical baseline, and Eliza, pausing during a water break, tells you that there's talk of expanding the mill, adding a 6th floor, running a second night shift. A 6th floor and a second night shift means more workers. More workers means more pressure on the housing stock around the mill. More pressure on the housing stock means higher rents. Higher rents means more people in smaller rooms. The arithmetic of expansion. They're putting in new frames too, Eliza says. She says it without particular emphasis. The way she says most things, she has the quality of someone who has processed most feelings through a fine enough mesh that they emerge without visible texture. She's been here since she was 8 years old. She's 13 now. The 5 years in between have produced the specific person she is, which is someone who observes everything and reacts to very little visibly. When? Before autumn, Mr. Simcox said, self-acting mules. Self-acting mules? The self-acting mule is a newer technology, a spinning frame that automates more of its own operation, that requires less intervention, less piecing, less of the constant human monitoring that your current job consists of. They're more efficient. They produce thread more consistently with fewer breaks. They also require fewer people. Eliza is stating a fact. She's not visibly concerned about what that fact implies for her position in this building. Maybe she's calculated it already and arrived somewhere on the other side of concern. Maybe she knows something you don't. You think about it for the rest of the afternoon. Wednesday evening, it rains. Manchester rain is different from other rain. You know this now in your body the way you know it theoretically. Ireland has rain. Ireland has a relationship with rain that is foundational and long-term, and in many ways defining. But Irish rain is largely water. Manchester rain is water plus the content of the clouds, which are carrying the exhalation of the city back down onto it in liquid form. Manchester rain has a smell and a colour and a slight stinging quality on exposed skin that straightforward water does not have. You walk home from the mill in it. The streets run with it. The drainage in Angel Meadow is theoretical. The gutters clogged with the accumulation of a week's urban detritus. And you pick your path carefully, staying close to the buildings, finding the high spots in the road that keep your boots out of the worst of it. Your boots have a weak point at the left sole, a separation at the front third that lets water in when the puddles are deep enough. You've repaired it 3 times with pitch from a vendor on Miller Street. It will need a 4th repair. You will do it on Sunday. In the doorway of a closed chandler's shop, a man is crouched against the door, his coat pulled over his head, asleep or ill, or simply waiting for the rain to stop. You can't tell which. His boots are worse than yours. You don't stop. You have nothing to give that would help. You keep walking. This is Manchester. You keep walking. Thursday. The meeting room above the Black Horse fills differently this week. There's an energy you can feel when you come in, the particular energy of a room that knows something different is happening. The chairs are arranged in a wider circle. There are more people than usual. 50, maybe 55. Word has gotten around about the man from The Guardian. His name is Charles Worthington. He's 31. He arrived early. You can see him already at the front. A narrow man with the particular colourless clothes of someone who wants not to be the most visible person in a room. He has a notebook, obviously, but he's not writing in it yet. He's listening. Hobhouse introduces him briefly. Manchester Guardian. Covering the Factory Act, the conditions question, interested in primary voices rather than official statements. No promises about what gets published, no editorial position assumed. The room is quiet in a specific way. The men and women in this room have experience with their voices going into official processes and emerging as something unrecognisable. The factory inspector writes things down. Parliament hears petitions. The newspapers publish the statements of mill owners and factory commission reports, and the counter-arguments of the political economists. These things happen. Then Monday arrives, and Simcox's watch is fast, and the slip is 6 pence short. He came here himself, Hobhouse says. That means something. A woman near the back, not Sarah Partington, a different woman, someone you don't recognise, says, "It means he wants a story." "Everything wants a story," Hobhouse says. "The question is whether the story that gets told is the one that's true." Worthington speaks for about 5 minutes. He's direct without being aggressive, which you appreciate. He says he wants to understand what the Factory Act means in practice. Not what it says, but what it does, or doesn't do, in the specific daily reality of a Manchester cotton mill. He's not interested in the argument about whether the factory system is good or bad in the abstract. He's interested in the concrete. He says, "I want to understand what changed and what didn't." Then he opens his notebook. The first person to speak is a weaver from Ancoats, a man named Crossley, who's been at the same mill for 12 years and has the quality of someone who has been storing testimony for a long time and is now finally offering it to a container that might hold it. He talks about the piecework system, the way wages that look adequate on paper become inadequate in practice because of the deductions for equipment damage, for thread waste, for infractions of various rules that accumulate across a week and take money from the envelope before it reaches the pocket. Worthington writes, Sarah Partington talks about the difference between what the Act says about women's hours and what actually happens. The informal pressure to stay longer, the understanding that those who leave at 12 hours are not overlooked for better positions but are also not promoted. The invisible economic coercion that doesn't show up in any report because it never appears in writing. Worthington writes more. He asks questions, good questions, specific questions. The questions of someone who's read the available documents and is trying to locate the distance between the documents and the experience. Then Hobhouse looks at you. Your turn. You unfold the paper, the thin sheet with the small close writing, slightly creased now from 4 days in your coat pocket. You look at Worthington. I wrote some of this down, you say, because I wasn't sure I'd remember it right when I was here. He nods. Read it if you want. You look at the paper. The first line. My name is Seamus Byrne. Then you put the paper down. You don't need it. You know what you saw. You know what your hands felt. You know the exact quality of the sound of machinery that has been running for 8 hours when you've been standing next to it for 8 hours. You know the weight of a tin cup of iron-tasting water at 8:30 when you've been sweating since 5. You know Owen's face in the flat light of the spinning room. You don't need the paper to tell you what you know. There's a boy on my floor, you start. He's 12 years old. Last Friday morning he hurt his hand. He covered it up because if the overlooker saw he'd be stood down and his wages stopped. When the factory inspector came through that afternoon, the inspector saw the bandaging. He wrote it in his notebook. Then he left. The room's quiet. The boy was back at work Monday, his hands healing. You look at Worthington. The inspector wrote things in his notebook. I don't know what. I don't know what it becomes. What I know is that on Monday morning the situation was the same as it was on Thursday morning, before the inspector came. Worthington writes. How old are you? He asks. 16. And your hours? The Act says 12, for someone my age. You pause. We generally work between 13 and 14. Generally, when production requires it, which is most weeks, he writes. Do you know other workers, adults, men over 18? What are their hours? The continuous shift men, the ones who run through the night, they can be at 16, 18 sometimes in peak season. Do they choose that? The question drops into the room. You hear someone near the back make a sound, not a laugh. A sound adjacent to laughing that contains no humour. They choose it, you say carefully, in the way that you choose to eat when you're hungry. You do it because not doing it has a cost you can't absorb. Worthington looks up from his notebook. He looks at you directly, and for a moment you have the specific sensation of being seen, not assessed, not measured, not filed, but actually seen, by someone whose seeing has consequence. That's well put, he says. Then he writes it down. The meeting goes on for 2 hours. At the end, Worthington closes his notebook and says that he'll write what he's heard, and that he can make no promises about what the paper does with it, but that he'll write it accurately and he'll use names only with permission. He asks you, specifically, if he can use your name. You think about Simcox, about the specific way the overlooker's eye can fall on a person and change the weight of their position in that mill, about the way Manchester keeps records of its troublemakers, not officially, not in any ledger you can point to, but in the network of mill managers and overlookers and counting room clerks who talk to each other, who keep the informal record that matters more than the formal one. You think about Owen's face when the inspector's notebook appeared. Yes, you say, use my name. Walking home from the Black Horse. The streets are dry tonight. The rain of Wednesday has moved on, leaving the cobblestones cleanish, the air marginally better. A decent night by Manchester standards, gas lamps throwing their yellow circles onto the street. You're carrying something that feels like a small door has opened, not wide, not transformatively, but open. The specific sensation of having said the true thing to a person who has the ability to put it somewhere it might do something. Maybe it does nothing. Maybe Worthington writes it and the editor cuts it. Maybe it's published and it changes nothing, but it was said. It's in the notebook now. Seamus Byrne, 16, Angel Meadow. Pisa at Cardwell's. It's in the record. You walk past the Irwell. It smells of itself. You walk through the court off Thomas Street through the door that sticks, down the cellar stairs. Bridget is awake, which surprises you. She's sitting at the table with something in her hands, sewing by the candlelight, the close work that she does whenever there's light, and her eyes will manage it. She looks up when you come in, then back at her work. How was it? She asks. You sit across from her. A man from the newspaper came. I spoke. She doesn't stop sewing. Your mam would be proud, she says. She says it simply, not as performance, just as fact. You don't know what to do with that for a moment. She'd think it was foolish, you say. Both can be true. Bridget bites a thread. My husband's been talking at meetings for 2 years. His wages haven't gone up. His hours haven't changed. But he keeps talking. Why? She looks up from the sewing. Her face in the candlelight is the face of someone who has given this question its due consideration across many years of occasions that called for it. Because the alternative, she says, is to believe it can't change. She goes back to her sewing. You sit with that for a while. Autumn. The light leaves Manchester earlier in autumn, or more precisely the smoke ceiling and the early dark combine by October into a condition of permanent near twilight that means you spend increasingly your waking hours in artificial light, gas jets in the mill, candles in the cellar, the occasional lamp in the street. The sun, such as it is, rises too late and falls too soon to be present for much of your working day. Your skin, which spent the summer greyed by soot and cotton dust, goes further. A kind of pallor that has nothing to do with cleanliness and everything to do with the absence of light. Everyone in the cellar has it. It's the look of Manchester in the dark half of the year. The new frames arrive at Cardwell's. 6 self-acting mules, enormous things, longer than the old frames and higher, requiring adjustment to the spacing on the floor. They arrive in pieces on 3 successive Monday mornings, and the installation takes 2 weeks, during which half the 3rd floor is reconfigured and 4 workers from that section are moved to other floors or let go entirely. Eliza is moved to the 2nd floor. You watch her walk through the spinning room one Thursday morning, her familiar back disappearing through the door, and feel a very specific loss, the loss of someone who anchored a piece of your landscape. You don't see her again. The new mules have different rhythms from the old frames, different sounds, a more complex mechanical conversation, deeper in the bass register, with a particular swooping motion of the carriage that the old frames didn't have. The spinning carriage moves out and back, drawing the cotton into thread on the outward motion and collecting it on the return. The motion is almost graceful for machinery. The sound is almost musical, if you adjust your definition of musical significantly. You piece them. The breaks are less frequent. Eliza was right about that. But when they happen, the geometry is different. The clearance is tighter. You have to learn new positions, new angles of approach. Your body, which had learned the old frames to the point of automaticity, has to start a new education. This takes 3 weeks. At the end of 3 weeks, you can piece the new mules with the same economy of motion you developed on the old frames. Faster than some, less fast than the people who've been doing it longer. Simcox watches. His watch is consulted. Nothing is said. Nothing being said is, with Simcox, a form of compliment. November. The water in the basin is frozen by the time you wake up. Not a thick freeze, not solid through, but a skin of ice that you break with the heel of your hand before you can use it. The water beneath is cold enough to make your hand ache. You wash anyway, because the alternative is to arrive at Cardwell's with your face in the condition your face is in when you don't wash, and Simcox has views about personal presentation that are in direct tension with the conditions he maintains for personal presentation. You break the ice. You wash. The cold is a different kind of presence than the summer heat. The summer heat in the mill was enveloping and constant and wore on you through accumulation. The winter cold gets in through the gaps, through the loose board in the door, through the small window with its cracked puttying, through the mattress that is several inches thinner than it was when you arrived, and has redistributed itself in ways that expose you to the flagstone beneath in 2 places. You sleep in your coat from November. Maya has a cough. She's had it for 3 weeks. Not serious. Not the deep, wet cough of the people in the cellar who've been here for 10 years and have lungs full of Manchester's record, but persistent. A dry, sharp cough that interrupts the nights. Bridget has given her something from the apothecary. You don't know what. Something that costs money they don't easily have. You think about your own lungs, how they feel. The slight catch on the deepest breath that wasn't there when you arrived. You don't think about it for very long. December. Something happens that doesn't happen often. A Sunday morning in December, the sky over Manchester does an unprecedented thing. It clears, not fully, not to the June blue of your memory, but to something that is genuinely sky. A pale winter blue with a particular clarity of cold, clean air, the clouds broken and moving fast on a northwest wind that has, for the morning at least, pushed the mill smoke east and left the city temporarily in the condition of being only itself without its ceiling. You see it from the cellar window, the faint blue high above the buildings across the court. You go outside. The light is, there is not a word for it, in the context of what you've been seeing for 15 months. The light is light, actual winter sunlight, thin and cold and directional, throwing shadows that have edges and making the familiar grey stone of the buildings look like stone rather than like a uniform surface absorbing everything that falls on it. You stand in the court and look up. The chimney of Cardwell's is visible from here, on its Sunday rest, motionless. Above it, blue sky. The chimney and the blue sky. Manchester, and the evidence that somewhere above the smoke there is a sky that persists. Pat comes out behind you, sees what you're looking at. God, he says, just that. You both stand there for a while. It's at the December Chartist meeting that you hear about Newport. Not Newport specifically. Newport was in 1839, 5 years ago in Wales. But its shadow is still present in the room whenever the physical force argument comes up. 20,000 Chartists marching on Newport intending to take the town. The soldiers waiting, 20 people dead. The leaders transported to Australia. The argument in the room tonight is about the second petition. The first petition, 1839, over 1 million signatures presented to Parliament rejected. The second petition, 1842, 3 million signatures, rejected again. The word that came back from Parliament, the precise parliamentary contempt of men voting not to discuss the thing that had been asked of them with 3 million names attached to it. That word had been delivered into this room and into rooms like it across the country, and had produced, in 1842, the plug riots. Workers pulling the plugs from factory boilers, stopping the engines, stopping everything. Manchester, 1842. You weren't here for it. You were still in Ireland, in a different version of the same disaster. But people in this room were here. Hobhouse was here. Sarah Partington was here. It's going to happen again, a man near the door says. Not a prediction, more like a weather report. Not the same way, Hobhouse says. What way then? And this is the argument that never quite resolves in this room. The argument between the people who believe that the route to the Charter runs through Parliament, through persuasion, through petition, through the steady accumulation of evidence and pressure that eventually tips the scales, and the people who believe that Parliament will respond to evidence and persuasion approximately never, and that only a demonstration of collective force will produce the change that is required. Both positions have evidence in their favour. Both have evidence against them. The room argues. You listen and you think and you don't speak tonight because tonight is not the night for what you have to say. The thing you have to say is still forming, still finding its shape. But you know what it is, roughly. It's this. The Newport men died for something they believed in, and Parliament responded by making sure they'd serve as a lesson. And the petition men gathered 3 million names, and Parliament responded by not discussing it. And meanwhile, in the cellar on Thomas Street, Mare coughs her December cough, and Owen's hand has healed but could be injured again tomorrow, and the cotton dust is counting its accumulation in lungs that belong to people who have no voice in the Parliament that passes the laws that govern the mills that produce the dust. Both paths are slow, but only one of them produces the charter, and the charter is the door, the opening, the beginning of the conversation that can't happen yet. You keep coming to the meetings, the year ends, not with ceremony. Manchester doesn't do ceremony for the turn of the year in the way of a place with leisure to mark occasions. The New Year arrives on the 1st of January, which is a Tuesday, which is a work day. You wake at 5:30, you break the ice in the basin, you walk to Cardwell's in the dark of an early January morning, your breath visible in front of you, your boots on frozen mud, Simcox at the gate, his watch. You're 3 minutes early. He says nothing. You go in. 15 months in Manchester. You're taller than you were when you arrived, which is not supposed to happen at 16 in the conditions you're living in, but apparently does anyway. You're thinner than you were, which is more in keeping with the conditions. You have learned, are learning, the learning continuous, never complete. A set of things that your body knows, and a set of things your mind knows, and a set of things that live in the space between. Your body knows the geometry of the spinning room on the 3rd floor of Cardwell's, the exact position of each frame relative to the others, the specific mechanical sounds that indicate a thread is about to break, a fraction of a second before it actually does, the weight of a full day in your hands, the smell of the earwell at every time of year, the feel of the cellar floor in January through the soles of your boots. Your mind knows the 6 points of the Charter, the specific provisions of the Factory Act, the difference between a self-acting mule and a throstle frame, the price of cotton thread per pound at current market rates, because this information is available from the Northern Star and you read it. The name of the local MP who voted against discussing the second petition. The space between knows. Something harder to name. Something that Bridget's comment, both can be true, lives in. The place where the tiredness of your hands and the writing on the thin paper coexist. The place where the view from Kersal Moor and the waterline on the cellar wall are both true at the same time, and you haven't yet resolved them, but you've stopped trying to make one of them false. This might be what growing up is, or what it's like to grow up in Manchester in 1844 at 16 years old. Which is a specific version of the general thing. You come home on a January evening to find Bridget has left soup on the fire. Real soup, an actual soup, with something that might be ham and something that is definitely potatoes, and some root vegetable whose identity you don't investigate too closely. It fills the cellar with warmth and smell, 2 things the cellar is not usually credited with. Mare is at the table writing. She looks up when you come in. Her cough is better, the worst of December behind her, her small chest no longer performing the sharp percussion that interrupted your sleep. Look, she says, and shows you what she's writing. It's the alphabet. Carefully, slowly, each letter formed with the concentration of a new acquisition. Her teacher at the ragged school set it as practice. You look at the letters. A, B, C, in Mare's careful 9-year-old hand. Slightly uneven, slightly too large, alive with the effort of a person learning to make language visible. That's good, you say. She looks at it critically. The C is wrong. It's fine. The teacher says, the C is fine, Maya. She considers this assessment with the seriousness it deserves. Then she goes back to writing. You serve yourself soup. Sit at the table. The cellar is warm from the fire. Pat is asleep in the corner. Flynn is out. Bridget is somewhere upstairs at a neighbour's. The soup is hot and there's bread, and you are right now at this specific moment, not being asked to do anything. You eat slowly. The candle on the table throws up the familiar 12 by 14, the familiar shapes, the waterline on the wall. The waterline has not moved. The cellar is what it was when you arrived. You are not what you were when you arrived. The soup is the best thing you've eaten in 3 weeks. You eat all of it and soak the bread in the last of the broth. And this is how it goes. This is how time moves in a place like this. Not in dramatic revelations, not in the kind of before and after that stories prefer to organize themselves around. It moves in the small increments of days that are mostly the same, accumulating into a person who is different, into conditions that shift by fractions, into a city that is building itself faster than it can understand what it's building. You are building yourself at the same speed. The meeting on Thursday, the basin in the morning, Simcox's watch, Owen's hand, healed, vulnerable again, the risk never absent. Hobhouse's room above the Black Horse, the paper from the printer, the thin sheet with both sides covered in small close writing. The name you gave to Worthington, your name, in his notebook, Seamus Byrne, 16, Angel Meadow, which is now in the Manchester Guardian, which you have read 3 times, which contains your words more or less as you said them, which is a thing that has happened. That could be you. That is you. Now. The attic is cold, not the cellar anymore. Bridget's husband found a room on the ground floor 2 streets over, with an actual window that opens onto actual ground rather than onto the underside of the street. It cost more. You and Pat split the difference and took the cellar room, and the man named Flynn moved up to the vacated attic of the building next door, and Mare is sleeping in a room where the floor is dry and has been dry since the last rainfall. These are the incremental victories. The attic costs less because it is cold, and the roof has gaps that the landlord has been intending to repair since the summer, and has not. In winter, a fine drift of moisture comes through the largest gap and deposits itself on the floorboards in a thin grey crust that you scrape off on Sundays. The wind finds you. The cold finds you, but it's yours, or rented, which here is a version of yours. You've been in Manchester for 16 months. You will be here for longer. You know this now. The letter from your uncle in Roscommon arrived 2 months ago. Your actual uncle. The one who sent the original letter. The one whose address proved out of date. Arrived and reported conditions at home that make returning not currently a viable option. The famine is in its 2nd year. The roads are bad. The places people come from, the specific places, the fields and houses and dimensions of a life that still exists in your memory as home. Those places are changed, are changing, in a direction that your uncle's careful language is doing its best to obscure but cannot entirely. You stay. Manchester is where you are. And Manchester, as it turns out, is not only what it looked like in the first days, it is also the Chartist meeting and Hobhouse's voice, and Sarah Partington refusing to wait her turn. It is also Owen's face in the spinning room, and Eliza's economy of motion, and the view from Kersall Moor, and the thin paper covered in your small close writing. It is also Brigid's soup and Mare's alphabet and the blue sky on that Sunday in December that lasted until noon and then was covered over again. It is all of these things. You have not resolved the contradiction. You don't think you're supposed to resolve it. You think the contradiction is the place where things happen, the gap between what is and what should be. And you are one of the people who's decided, not dramatically, not with any particular announcement, but decided nonetheless to stand in the gap and keep talking. Sleep, when it comes in stages. First the cold recedes, the blanket and the coat and the slight warmth of the room from the chimney flue that runs through the wall from the floor below. These combine slowly to bring your temperature up from the specific alertness of cold to the beginning of warmth. Your feet, which have been registering their usual end-of-day complaint, go quiet. The sounds of Manchester settle into their night configuration. Not silent, never silent, but lower. The mechanical heartbeat of the mills muffled by the closed hours, present only at the edges of perception. The street outside slower, voices fewer, the occasional horse, the occasional shout from somewhere. Your hands stop aching. Your hands always ache, the way anything that works hard aches, and you've learned not to hear it the way you've learned not to hear certain sounds in the spinning room. But at the end of the day, in the specific moment when sleep begins to arrive, your hands go quiet. The constant low complaint of the knuckles, the palms, the fingers, it goes below the threshold of notice. Your hands have made the same motion today, several hundred times. Tomorrow they'll do it again. Right now, they're still. You don't know what England will look like in 50 years. You don't know what Manchester will look like. You have no way of knowing that in 10 years there will be a great exhibition in London that will present the Industrial Revolution to the world as the triumph of human ingenuity, and that the world will largely agree, and that the people in the spinning rooms and the cellar dwellings will be, at that exhibition, represented by their products rather than their persons. You don't know that in 60 years there will be a parliament that finally, haltingly, with reservations and conditions and limitations, extends the vote to working men. You don't know that in 100 years the mills will be gone. Not all of them, not immediately, but going, the industry moving, the buildings emptying, the great chimneys coming down one by one until the Manchester skyline is the skyline of a city that used to be different. You don't know that the questions being asked in the room above the Black Horse on St. George's Road, the questions about who gets to shape the laws they live under, who gets to be counted, who gets to say, those questions will keep being asked in different rooms, in different cities, in different languages, by different people who do not know the name Seamus Byrne, but are asking the same things and standing in the same gap. You don't know any of this. All you know is that tomorrow is a work day, that the basin will be cold, that the mile to Cardwell's will be dark in January, and your left boot will need another repair before the sole separates completely. That Simcox's watch will say something that might not be true, that the thread will break several hundred times and your hands will fix it, and that on Thursday there will be a meeting. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it takes everyone who has worked this hard, who has stood this long, who has carried this much without anywhere particular to set it down. Let the sounds of the city fade from sharp to soft to distant. Let your hands rest. You've been standing since 5:30 this morning. You've been standing in one sense or another since you arrived. Let the machinery go quiet. The frames are stopped now. the spindle still, the cotton dust settling in the dark of the closed mill. Let Manchester do whatever it does without you for these hours. It will be fine. It was here before you, and it will continue. The smoke will rise from the chimneys in the morning, and the belt drives will engage, and the water jets will spray their humidity into the hot air, and the frames will pull and draw and spin. And you will be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. You'll be there, but not now, not this minute. This minute, you're warm enough, tired enough. You have said the true thing to a man who wrote it down. You have looked at the city from the hill and understood something about its shape. You've eaten soup and watched a 9-year-old write the alphabet with painful care, and thought about the future without being able to see it, and decided, in the small, undramatic way of a real decision rather than a story's decision, to keep going anyway. That's enough for tonight. That's everything tonight. The candle went out an hour ago. The city breathes below you, grey and relentless, and making itself as it has always made itself, out of the work of the people who live in it, and who are sometimes allowed to know that their work builds the thing they inhabit, and who are sometimes not. You are 16 years old. You've been in England for 16 months. You have cotton dust in your lungs, and a name in a newspaper and a piece of paper with your handwriting on it somewhere in Hobhouse's coat pocket. This city has not eaten you. You are still becoming whatever you are becoming. The church bell, somewhere east of you, strikes the hour. You don't count the strokes. It doesn't matter what hour it is. Let the sounds go. Let the cold at the edges of the blanket become background. Let the gap in the roof and the winter outside it recede. Let your hands be still. Let the thread rest. Let Manchester, great grey, grinding, magnificent, terrible Manchester, let it exist without you for a few hours. Let it be the thing it is without requiring anything of you. Not your hands, not your hours, not your name on a counting slip, not your lungs filling with its particular air. It will all be there when you wake, the mill, the moor, the river, the room above the Black Horse. All of it there. But right now is yours. The dark behind your closed eyes is warm. The city sounds are far away. Somewhere out there people are still working, still carrying, still standing at frames and counting windows and cellar doors and the edges of conversations that might or might not become the thing that changes things. They'll still be working tomorrow. So will you. But for now, let it go. Let it all go soft. Let sleep come the way it came to the 16-year-old on the attic floor in Manchester in January 1845, in the city that built the world while the world was not entirely paying attention. Let it come, and let it hold you until morning. Good night.